All right. Well, thanks to all our readers. This is the moment where we have a bit of time to talk. Anybody has any questions or comments online or in person?
We have many expressions of appreciation. Gorgeous poems to Ali, I think, because it was just now. And Claire, from Heather Jessup, Francis and I loved your poems. Uma Lumpas, Flash Mobs, Lipstick Parasols. We love lichen. And Jeremy commented that it was interesting. They found going between languages changes the flow, yet doesn't ruin it. It enhances it, Jeremy. Yeah, no questions that I can see so far.
Yeah, thanks for sharing the comments. Those are good to hear. Ross has a question.
I don't have a question.
No, he doesn't have a question.
I just want to say, hi, Allie. How you doing?
Ross, I miss you.
I wish you could come, and I know why you can't, but your spirit will be at Coach Weekend.
Send a plane, Ross, will you?
They're steadfast.
Oh, wonderful. Yes.
There's a question from Melanie. Melanie, do you want to unmute and ask it?
Hello. Yes, I will. I don't have my video on because I'm actually in bed, not feeling that well. But my question is for Ali. What drew you to Keats and to that Bright Star sonnet specifically?
Hi, Melanie. I hope you feel better very soon. Yeah, why Keats? Geez, he's very different from my work for sure, writing mostly in sonnets, very formal. He died when he was 25. I could never possibly understand what it would be like to have a life like his. He wrote that sonnet when he was quarantined off the coast of Naples in a ship for 10 days, and he scrawled it into a copy of his Shakespeare's collected works. And it's thought that it was his last poem that he wrote before he died, actually, in Rome. So not exactly my life, really, but I found that really interesting to write into that using contemporary poetry. You know, and to be like a trans person writing into kind of that canon. I don't suppose Keats could entirely know what it's like to be me too, and I was very drawn to that. But you sort of need to think about who you're writing into and why, and the complications of it when you're doing it, you know. But honestly, aside from all that, the truth is I just love that first line so much. And when I thought that I was looking for a poem I could sort of carry with me as a place of refuge, I just kept hearing that bright star, would I were steadfast as thou art. That first paroxysm of bright star, so many possibilities, the optative mood of would I were, that funny little antiquated steadfast with its missing A, and then the as thou art. I like the art and the thou, and it had so much interest in it for me that I couldn't stop thinking about it, I suppose.
Can I follow up and ask if it was tricky to end with Keats? Like his ending had to be your ending? Was that tricky at all?
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Especially when you end with to death, you know, that's quite the thing to end on. So you know, I didn't find that difficult.
No, it happened just organically, and there you were.
It's fun because that last to death, the whole thing is an apostrophe, a poetic apostrophe, where you're speaking to someone who isn't there, who can't respond. And I love the extra little apostrophe or ode of the to death, even though that's not how it goes in the poem. I love that, and the idea of not only speaking to this lover, but a little bit speaking to death and to the impossibility of steadfastness in the end. It really kind of excited me that you could kind of jig and jag with that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then death kind of gets to reverberate back through the rest of it.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Kathy had a
Yes, that
question.
was my question, but I have another question. This is for Claire. Hey, Claire. Hey, I didn't know you retired. Congratulations.
Mhm.
Everybody
Also,
says
what a
that.
loss.
Everybody says that, and it's true. So this is a totally selfish question. Do you have a poem about the carrot?
Yes, but I have a title. I have written the title. I know that species is in the book, but I don't have the piece because it has to do with my mother and forest woman, right? Yeah.
And if I was really
I'm having
smart.
a hard time on Zoom hearing the questions just and the comments just because they're so far back in the room.
Yes.
I asked very selfishly, can you hear this?
Is that working? That's working.
Okay, I asked very selfishly if she had a poem about Umbilicaria lichen. I asked because it's one of the few plants you can get a purple dye from.
Huh.
Right? Plant/animals, question mark. But yeah,
I think the answer was yes, but it was a difficult poem to write because it also addresses Claire's mother. Is that?
Yeah, it's that complex relationship. So that the rest of the book is done, and then there's two that aren't. One is Z because there is no Z like, and I have to invent one, and it came in a dream a while ago, but to write a dream is just awful, so I don't know what I'm gonna do there. And then U is about my mother, so that's the other one that's still a blank. But yes, it's a cordon lichen, so obviously all the scientific names have, they're embedded metaphors by the scientists who, by the way, are still working hard to not be metaphorical and failing all the time. So, but yeah, that will be in there, I think. If it's not, you'll know why.
well thought.
Yeah.
Was that audible for folks online? Excellent, good.
To follow up, when you're making a dye out of Umbilicaria, do you know this? When you're making a dye out of Umbilicaria, you need to use a mordant, and they suggest something acidic like urine.
Yes, most dyes are,
Yeah.
they used to collect pee
And
in
the-
Scotland.
Yeah, and the best urine is the urine of a young boy collected early in the morning.
Oh, there's poetry everywhere, folks. There's poetry everywhere.
A question from Khalid. Were you listening to jazz when you wrote Soft Fallen?
Ah, Khalid, are you a fan of jazz? I love jazz so much. I was probably listening to Nils Fromm, if I had to say, but yes, I did have been listening to quite a bit of jazz, so it's quite probable. That's wonderful. Are you wondering that because of the sound of it?
Khalid, would you like to unmute and reply?
Or reply in the chat, I suppose.
Yes, true.
Or no pressure?
There we go.
wonderful.
I was reading it while listening to jazz.
Oh, you'll have to send the song that you were, or the artist that you were listening to.
Oh, that's a good idea. Jennifer.
I have a question for Claire. I just loved those pieces that you read, and I was wondering, did the metaphors that you found embedded in the names of each lichen suggest the relationship that you were going to, or the content of what the poem was actually going to also give out? Did that come like sort of naturally, or was it a meditation on the name and what it looked like?
Sometimes, yes, all of that, but yes, sometimes it did. Particularly the ones that came sort of almost as formed wholes, where it doesn't even, it feels unfair, and there they are. That had a lot to do with, it came out of the title, but often the sound, or the sound and image out of that, yes. But I didn't deliberately set out what's the metaphor. Sometimes I was playing with the common name translated in different languages. What is the common name of this and that and the other? And that elicited all sorts of, again, further metaphors. Yeah. Rehalia. So sometimes it was a common name, sometimes it was the scientific name, but yeah, it was inescapable. It wasn't an obstacle. At times I wore it, at times I left it.
Were they all like things that you've seen physically, or did some
Yes.
far away?
No, they needed to be within walking distance, actually. This was partly during COVID.
Okay.
And I wanted local deep connection, and I wanted to be able to visit and revisit and have a non-linguistic relationship with them.
That's awesome. That's amazing.
And so that mattered, which made a few of them difficult. Jane, for example.
Yeah, so you went through like A to Y, it sounds like, with
Yeah, but
local
Z
languages?
was dreamed, and it was the first before I wrote anything. So that one will be, but it'll be the last one I write. Yeah, A to Y.
That's astonishing. I feel like that says amazing things about like it's like.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that means, but the first time I collected them, I laid them out on 2-pine boards for about 3 or 4 years and refused to learn the names because it would change the relationship I had with them. And then there would be that, oh, I know what you are, you're at this. So I try to keep that open for years. And
But does the name have to shut it down? Like, does the name have to be like, I know what you are, you're this, I put a pin in you? Can't it be like an opening itself?
it felt dangerous to start with that.
Yeah,
Yes.
fair enough.
Tried to sit with it. I'm not sure why. It's just a quirky thing, actually. There's nothing intelligent to offer about that. I just had fine boards and crusty things for a while that I refused to learn about. Commitment to ignorance.
Temporarily.
Yeah.
Diane?
I wanted to hear a little bit more about Ally's, this new form, with this break and enter form. You're inviting us to take any well-known poem. And then with this breaking into parts, I know you're in Steadfast, you're responding typically in one sequence. But what about, say, working with shorter lyrics? Is that legal?
Nothing's legal when you're breaking entering, so go for it. Doesn't have to be a well-known poem, just something you really want to enter honestly, to bring yourself to, I would say. Something that you want to live with for quite some time.
Yeah, that seems key.
And you would, of course, acknowledge your source, but it
Well,
sounds like a lot of fun to try.
I might and I might not. Like for something like Keats, not necessarily. I'm fine with thieving that. I don't necessarily think I need to say that I like that it's Keats, so I will say that it's Keats. I'm quite interested in him as a human and as a poet, but something from that long ago, I don't know. I assume my audience is so smart that the instant I say bright star, right?
Something about thieving from the superstore versus thieving from like the mom and pop corner store.
Exactly, yes.
I wouldn't mind hearing a little bit from the translators or the folks in the room who have been here as translators. I'm asking this because I always find it very interesting, so I hope other people do too. But were there like any places where you felt like, oh, that's a tricky decision? What am I gonna do here? Or alternatively, were there places where you're like, oh yeah, I know what this is gonna be? Jennifer's nodding. So if there's something in your head, could you share it with us and buy time for the other folks?
Yes, it's interesting because I feel like the poem that I translated it was already in such plain language in French, and some of the things, little turns of phrase that you don't even think about, like, huh? Like, how would you translate like into an English poem, right? So I went with A,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it could have been a lot of different things, right? And in the English version, like she calls the Trans-Canada plat, which literally means flat, but we in Acadie, when we say something's flat, we mean it's plat, c'est dull, it's boring. And I ended up in English just calling it med because I think it's also slang, the way that is slang in Acadie. But I really struggled with some of those things that feel like second nature when I hear them. That I could have just said dull, but oh, you know what? That's already kind of a metaphor too. Like it's slang, but it's metaphor. So there was all sorts of places where that happened.
I love that you're describing that it made you stop and think about language that you take it for granted.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely. Like I've said 1,000 times, oh, that's so right, flat. But I never thought, oh, I mean, fell flat. Like it was a really, really interesting exercise. And one of the harder ones was number 4 when she says in French, chier, and I translated it as he can go fuck himself instead of he can go shit himself, which would be the literal translation. But it's not really what people actually mean when they say it in French. They don't mean it literally. So there was all sorts of little nuances.
Translating the spirit of the language other than the letter of the language there.
And I really had taken so many things for granted about very simple statements. It like forces you into and underneath like the meanings of even things like
Right.
Eh? Why do we do that? Why are we groaning? Like, and what is that even?
I mean, what's our range of growth? Where is it in the scale?
Like it really brought, it brought a lot of things kind of to the surface that I think can be hidden in just even our daily chit chat. So super interesting.
Kathy or Carlos?
Oh my goodness, I struggled a lot and had a lot of fun. I'm just looking at the title, like immediately I'm skiing down the slope and immediately I'm in the woods. Get out of it. Because the Rose's title is C'est exécré manie de gloire, and mania for glory, and exécré, I put perverse, but Carlos used odiosa, which now I'm thinking I want to translate his version of this poem. I think a lot of fun. But
we do a whole issue just translating one poem back and forth.
But one thing, like honestly, for a couple of translations, mine was titled "This Shitty Hand of Glory," but it didn't. It was too much in the woods. It was too far from Rose's poem.
Yep, I'm with you.
It took me down a whole different ski slope. So I had to pull it back. But from square one, it was
You were already feeling the pressure of those possibilities. Yeah. Yeah, Shitty doesn't have the grandeur, I don't think.
No, it's
Cool.
Yes, certainly was kind of outright dislikeness. Since as I told you, when I felt that I was very close to Spanish.
Yeah.
And yes, the title, I could use the literal translation for the title, but I choose something like hateful. Then, yes, I felt it like sometimes very colloquial, sometimes kind of solemn, but without losing the meaning. Like this is like a total sarcasm. So the poet is making fun of people who don't understand what's going on in their lives. And yes, there was some word that we don't usually use in a normal conversation in Spanish. Okay. And I felt that, okay, so I had to try my best to do it so people can understand the real meaning of this. Okay.
So you didn't go with the word that seemed like more, I don't know, the more faithful translation because it was a less familiar word to folks in Spanish? Is that the?
Yes, that was it.
And when you spoke about the range from like the colloquial to the solemn, you saying you were finding that in Rose's poem, or you were making those choices yourself, sort of in translating?
I did those choices.
Yeah.
Yes. Because the poem is at the same time colloquial and at the same time solid.
Right. So you're sort of picking that up from the poem.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, and that's one of the big problems, right? Or the big challenges in translation, because are you supposed to keep it closer to something that the original audience would be responding to in a certain way? You know, like maybe they would have to look up that word as well. Maybe it wouldn't be that familiar to them. Or are you trying to make it a little bit more understandable to the audience that you're translating it for? Because in fact, you're already making changes to, you know, kind of explain or kind of make it easier to follow in your own language. So it's a really tough choice. And I was thinking when Jennifer was talking as well, all the levels of language. So that's, you know, up at the top if it's unfamiliar, but then down, you know, on the everyday thing and slang and everything, completely different, because slang words don't correspond. Like they really don't, you know. Swearing is an example, humor is an example, you know, all these really tough things. I think they did an amazing job. I just think it was so good.
Leadership on it. Yeah.
Here.
Can I add one thing to this discussion?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so I was really delighted with Jennifer's reading. I had been looking forward to the reading, and when you said Rose wasn't here, I thought, crap, I really wanted to hear it. And you got the rhythms, and that was the other thing to translate.
Right.
Because if you do a direct translation of the words, it does not feel like the same poem.
Right.
And that's hard, because you go way off base to get the feeling, and then the words on the page aren't the same thing, are the same.
Yes.
So that was small amount down there.
I feel like I'm coming back a little too to Ali saying with the ending with death and the ultimate impossibility of steadfastness, right? We're sort of in that same place again, talking about translation. Yeah.
That's a good time.
Yeah,
Good job.
it happened.
I was thinking about the boulders that you ran into in translation as you guys were speaking in, because Joan Elder translated Soul. And the process was that she would do a literal translation, and then the two of us would work on it to make it into something that resonated in English. And that book has an allegorical word, beauté, in every single poem. And if you just put beauty in every single poem in English, it's going to sound awful, right? It's going to sound repetitive and
Oh, that sounds like a
cheesy.
challenge, Ross. That sounds like a challenge. Let's all do it.
Actually, I think Suzanne got into discussion, and Joanne and I, but it's went around for a month. And eventually we decided on the exquisite.
Oh, wow.
Trying to reach that sort of allegorical sense of what the word was meaning for Serge, Patrice Thibodeau in the book.
That is really interesting.
So I guess you guys didn't have any boulders like that, or did you?
We weren't doing that many poems, right? So it wasn't like the boulder we kept running into.
Moguls, they were like moguls.
Claire's got something in the back there.
Yeah, I was wondering, since poetry operating at the level of a line, operating, you can call it that, as you lay down your own over the original, which is and isn't the original, were there places where the one you were laying over that trail wanted to veer down another path and you had to not go there? Like, was there because you're also poets, so as you write, you're like, oh, this is, no, we can't. Yeah, like, what brought you back? What did you do when you found what you were making was maybe taking on too much of a life of its own? I don't know.
I think Joanne and I talked a bit about that, and about Fred Cogswell. Sometimes he did translations, and sometimes he would say a poem after.
Yeah.
So that's,
Yeah.
so when you got hit by the inspiration and took it in a whole different direction, that would be sort of a signal. It wasn't, you thought you got too far, you couldn't call it a translation.
Is there a gray area inside when it is a translation, but you may be kind of doing that, or is it temptation, or does it just pull them into the comment? I want the gray area.
Yes.
Well,
There it is.
and I think part of this, the whole context of it, a workshop for people, including very beginning translators and, different backgrounds and different languages and things like that, was to emphasize the sort of playfulness and the experimentation that you can do with translation. And Simone's exercise at the beginning of doing this, kind of the broken telephone kind of thing, you can go and translate things in many different ways. And if you translate it back, it won't be the poem that you were translating to start with. Mm-hmm. And I think that's good. I think that's a good thing. I think there's so many different factors to consider, and some of them is how the writer feels about it, how the translator feels about it, how the publisher feels about it. Editors like Ross, when we were going like, okay, we can really dig into these things. That's a different thing than someone who wants to say, no, I want something that's really sort of more literal, and doing it that way. But I think it's the same thing. Isn't that some of the same work as poetry? Like you're kind of looking at a word and going, I can use this, or I can use that. I can really emphasize this kind of alliteration or something, or I can change the words so that I'm not, doing that. And I think that's the same kind of questions as we're asking ourselves.
To be faithful to something, which is about steadfastness again.
One of the translations I found quite joyful was Khalid's, actually, with that continued use of the word panda, both in English and in French. There was a beautiful poem, but then the translation, and you just have panda covering the 2 pages. It did bring out a certain joy and new interest, and
it did, yeah. And that was Simon Brown, who was there for the translation workshop as well, who co-facilitated it with me. But I really liked that choice. I thought it was, sometimes it's just that, how a poem affects you, how it kind of jumps out at you. And Simone had lots and lots of choices of doing it, and chose that one because it really spoke to him. And I think that was true of all of them, because they had a lot of choices. We weren't assigning poems, as is sometimes done.
Yeah, I think that particular choice, the way that looked, was so good for a literary magazine too. It looked like art on the page, in a way that reflects that translation, but that similarity through it was really, really neat.
I would last word. Sure. I would say that for anyone who's working in poetry, you should give it a try to translate one of your own pieces, even to say it in other words, even just a little bit, because it will open up things and you'll discover meanings in your words that you never even realized. It forces the unconscious up when you try translation. So it really brings all that unconscious loadedness of words to the surface. And I think it's, for poets, it's a really valuable little exercise.
Any tips where to start? I mean, even en français or en espagnol.
wherever you can, just start. Wherever you can.
Yeah, no, just translated English to English,
Yeah, English to English, put it in other words.
image to image, or, yeah.
That was how the workshop started.
Yeah.
We weren't translating from one language into another, we were translating within a single language. So maybe that's a good place to start since it's where the workshop started. I don't know.
It's been in a workshop where there was a poem from Horace translated into English in the 20s. And our job was to then translate that English version from the 20s into contemporary English.
That's a good one.
Ah,
Yeah, that sounds great.
uh-huh.
When I used to teach intro, I would take three translations of Ovid, one from the 18th century, one from the 19th century, one from the 20th century, same section, and just a short section, but and then get the students to, okay, so what is it saying in our language?
Mhm.
And that sort of gave me the top stuff of a few sentences.
Good, I'm writing this down as a technique to use. All right, well, now that we have talked about startings for a while, it's unfortunately my job to end the conversation, which has been amazing. Thank you all for being here virtually and in person. Thanks once again to all the readers. Another round of applause. And to our ASL interpreters. That's it, folks. Good night. Bye, everybody online. Thank you.